footage we've got right here, this little stone.jpg, and we're going to take this over to the right. Now, because I want it in the foreground, I almost want it to be kind of like our cameraman was just behind a rock and then sort of lifted up over the rock as he continued this shot. So because of our camera motion that we have currently, we'll probably want to edit that motion a little bit so it looks kind of just a little bit different from what we've got going right now. So what we'll do is just go ahead and this rock is going to be a 3D object, so we won't want to merge it into our scene because we'll need to do a light wrap on it since it's something different that we're adding, and we have these other two elements of the shadow and our actor that are being merged in. So the rock will have to be merged in since it's coming in later rather than just being plugged into this other scene with everything else. So let's go ahead and we'll hit the tab key to bring in a merge node. We can drop that between our viewer and our other merge. We'll also need a sphere and a scanline render. So we'll drop in a scanline renderer. And to get a sphere, instead of typing it this time, I'll just go straight to it right there. We'll drop that in. So I want the object scene to be plugged into the scanline render. And in the image pipe, we'll plug that into our stone. Our camera, we want to plug into the same camera we're using for everything else. And then let's go ahead and plug our A pipe of our merge node into that same scanline render. And we'll go ahead and hold the control key down to add a dot node just to clean that up. Now this looks kind of strange, so let's go ahead and go into our 3D view to see what's going on. And it's because this rock is massive and the sphere that it's being projected on is also very big. So first things first, I want the shape of this to be a little more egg-shaped than perfectly round. So I'm going to go into the scale, and in the Y, instead of having a 1, I'm going to do a 0.5. So that's going to kind of smash it down. And overall, I need it to be much smaller. So I'm going into the uniform scale and turning that down as well. Now I want this to be close-ish to the camera. So I'm just going to kind of place that in the general vicinity, kind of there for now. And then we'll play with it in a moment. But if I go out to my 2D view, you can see that it really just becomes more visible over time. And that's kind of the opposite of what I want. I sort of want to start with more of my image obscured and then move towards something that looks more like this, except I want to be able to see the actor. And so let's go ahead and go back into our 3D view and start to edit our camera a little. So if we're on frame 0, and we open up our camera in our properties bin, just starting right there. We really don't need a key on the X translation, so I can right click and choose no animation. We're not moving from side to side at all. But the Y that we have right now is probably a little bit too low. So let's move that Y up, kind of just starting a little bit higher, probably around 1.5 or so, something like that. For our rock. Actually, I kind of like the placement of this better rather than starting up really high. So let's just kind of do something like this where we're really close to just being kind of dead on with our shot. And then for the Z, let's change that one a little bit and kind of actually start in a little bit closer than we were. So just kind of right in there. And then for our rotation, we'll leave that at 0 on the first frame. Now, if we go to 200, I'm going to change this so instead of rotating up, we're kind of rotated down, because you can see when we rotate up, the rock comes more into view. So let's change that to something negative and maybe do something more drastic than what we've had. So we had a 3, let's do a -5. And then we'll need to move that Y up. So this is when it's important for the Y to be up a little bit higher, kind of maybe in this area here. So we're still looking at the scene, but the rock is almost out of frame. And then for the Z axis, I think that we could probably just move in a little bit closer, not a ton, but a little bit there. So it still feels like it's just kind of pulling in. Let's go ahead and take a look in our 2D and just see what this looks like and if we need to change anything. So if we're starting at 0 and kind of moving through here like this, That's really not that bad, but it still feels like maybe we're a little bit too tilted, so maybe we could do like a -4 on that rotation. And then let's jump back into our 3D view and move our camera down a little bit on that last frame. Okay, that looks pretty good. And our rock, we will definitely want to be out of frame at this point. And on our first frame, we don't want our rock totally covering our actor. So we may need to continue kind of to move the camera down on this first part. Okay, so we're making some progress here. Pretty much every time you're going to add something big to your scene, you may have to make a few adjustments, and that's okay. So I'm going to kind of pull the rock over there to the side, and then as we click through, we see more of our actor. The rock kind of starts to go away, and we're getting some really nice rotation within our scene. Great. Now, one thing that I think I would still like to do is maybe move it up just a little bit more, or move these backgrounds down a little bit, because I can see a little spot down here and I'm not seeing a lot of those at the top. That's an easy thing to fix. So let's just go ahead and play with the backgrounds a little bit more by grabbing those cylinders and pulling those down to the point where, you know, we're not missing out on the tops of anything, but we can, the bottoms of those are still there for us to be able to use those. And then our other background cylinder, let's go ahead and pull that one down as well. And when we're on that first frame, again, we want to make sure that we're not pulling that down so far that we're losing any information. Okay, so that looks much, much better. So now we're getting this sort of a motion, and it's really a little bit better of a camera move overall. So adding that rock kind of helped us to evaluate that, and now this is looking much, much better and more realistic in the way that this is moving. We're just taking better advantage of having that on 3D geometry and really all the work that we put into that scene. Okay, so we've got our rock in our shot, but it looks really strange right now. So let's go ahead and add a rotoscope kind of around the rock itself. So I'm just going to look right at that, and we'll just add a roto node. And I'm just going to really quickly go in there and kind of create a bezier around the edges of the rock. It doesn't need to be perfect because it's going to be placed on that geometry anyway, and we don't really want to see the edges of it, but I really don't want to see the grass. So that's kind of what we're trying to avoid there. So now we've got that roto. Let's jump back out to our main merged view. And it looks like we're going to need to add, again, a pre-molt node after our roto. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's also add a geodisplace after our sphere. Or a displaced geo rather. That's going to be key to finding that node. And then we'll just plug that into our pre-molt and add a little dot node so that it's not going right over itself. You can see this is way too much scale for this, so we'll go into the scale and turn that down to make it not quite so bumpy. And if you want to, you could go into the sphere and turn up those rows and columns maybe to something a little bit bigger, so you've got a little more geometry to work with. And then because you do that, it's a little bit easier to go into the scale of your displaced geo and turn it down a little bit further, because less scale goes farther with that type of thing. Now the rock is still going to need some color correction, but we're well on our way to having that nice bit of foreground geometry. So stick around, and in the next lesson we'll be finishing up fixing the rock, and also if we